Welcome to the Lovers Lounge podcast, where we talk to experts and other guests on topics related to love, relationships, and sex. I am your host, Tina Love, and on this episode, I'm talking to Michelle Roberts, who is a certified psychotherapist at Relational Trauma Recovery Center in St. Louis. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yes, I'm very, very excited. Of course, you are from St. Louis, so I'm really happy about that, my home. So, yes, really, really
Yeah,
glad and anxious to talk with you. So, Michelle, why don't you tell us a little more about yourself? I know I've introduced you as a psychotherapist, but exactly what you
sure,
do. Yeah.
sure. This is actually my second career. I was first a journalist for many years, and I decided to go into psychotherapy about 10 years ago. And I am just completing my PhD, and I practice here in St. Louis. So my focus and emphasis is trauma.
Okay.
So I help folks who have experienced trauma as children or adults. And my specialty is relational trauma. And what that means is that's trauma that occurs in a relationship with someone else, whether it be a parent, a sibling, a loved one, a spouse. Um, those relationships are very important. And when they get disrupted, it can actually be quite psychologically traumatic.
Yes. Okay. And we're going to talk about, in particular, relationships with a narcissist in a little moment. But your
Yeah.
website mentions PSD trauma and some other types of trauma. Can you give a little bit more examples of some of the traumatic experiences that people have that may lead them to you in your practice?
Sure, sure. Well, I think everyone experiences some trauma at some point in their lives, and we all go through things, and we all kind of synthesize it differently. But the people who come to see me are usually folks who are getting out of long-term relationships that were troubling. My focus is on survivors of narcissistic abuse. So what that means is the people who come to see me are used to being in relationship with folks who aren't playing by the normal relationship rules. Um, and that can be children who had, or people who had parents who were narcissists. It can also be people who are getting out of relationships, adult relationships with folks with that disorder. So generally, most of my clients are women, but not all. And generally, I'm seeing them as they are exiting a relationship.
Okay. So, can you give some characteristics? Because, I've seen books written about
Mm-hmm.
being in a relationship with a narcissist. Can you give characteristics or just break this down of exactly what a narcissist is or characteristics of them?
Sure. Well, I like to kind of broaden out this definition a little bit.
Okay.
So, pathological narcissism is really a label for folks who have all sorts of different disorders. That's kind of the broad label. And the disorders that are particularly harmful um, to others in relationship with these folks are sociopaths, um, psychopaths, narcissists, malignant narcissists, borderline personalities, or people who are prone to antisocial behaviors. And all of these personality types can generally be grouped under the term cluster B in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is kind of like the Bible that people in my industry use to kind of label and sort and diagnose folks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, what all of these groups have in common is that they often operate in extremely manipulative ways within the context of intimate relationships. due to their deceitfulness, lack of empathy, and tendency to exploit others.
Okay. So they are very manipulative, you said, and what were the others again?
Yes, they lack empathy.
Okay.
And they tend to exploit others.
I see. Okay.
So some of the behaviors that my clients will, or some of the behaviors that my clients have experienced is they have, gotten into a relationship with somebody, and in the beginning, it's been wonderful. But as time goes on, as soon as they're committed to the relationship, it falls into a predictable pattern. So relationships with folks with pathological narcissism follow a very predictable pattern, and it includes 3 stages: idealize, devalue, and discard.
Mm-hmm.
So during the idealization stage, folks with pathological narcissism are really adept at mirroring. They'll often imitate or copy their partner's characteristics, behaviors, traits, interests, and beliefs, making them believe that they found their ideal mate. This person can portray himself or herself as someone they're fundamentally not, creating kind of an illusion to make their partners more vulnerable to the manipulation and abuse that is going to come. Do you want me to keep going?
Yes, okay.
Okay, the devaluation stage starts when folks with pathological narcissism become bored with their partners or otherwise tired of pretending to be someone they're not. This usually happens after they know their partners are invested in a relationship, or it would be difficult for them to leave for emotional or financial reasons. So at this point, you might observe discrepancies in the things that your partner told you, or that their actions don't really reflect the beliefs that they had previously claimed to hold.
Okay.
So you might sense that, they're pulling away or becoming aware of a suspicious or of a darker side, that could include everything imaginable, from, crime, to misuse of other relationships, abusing drugs, alcohol problems, sex addiction, or other relationships through secretive text, calls, or emails.
Okay.
And so during this stage, folks with pathological narcissism use emotional manipulation and other abusive strategies to keep their partners under control. And one of the most effective of these is by using a chronic pattern of sabotaging and reestablishing closeness in the relationship without appropriate cause or reason. So that kind of push-pull,
okay.
That is kind of how you can begin to sense that you might be in one of these relationships, very hot and cold. So this can include, they treat their partners coldly and callously for no apparent reason, only to return to loving, affectionate behavior.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And this is really, it's a technique called intermittent reinforcement. So gambling machines are highly addictive. And they are basically designed on this kind of theory of intermittent reinforcement. And that is, it's just what it sounds like. Intermittently, you are given a treat. So when a victim of these relationships is given small doses of affection throughout the abuse cycle to keep her engaged in the relationship. And this really conditions her to expect less each time the couple interacts. And it also programs her to associate love with unpredictability, distress, unease. So that's kind of how these relationships really take root. This contributes to trauma bonding and the sensation that she's addicted to her partner, even though she knows, in her mind, cognitively, she knows that what's happening in the relationship is bad, but she can't leave because of this sense of being addicted, because of this pattern of push, pull, push, pull.
Mm-hmm. So they kind
And
of,
then,
okay, I was going to say, then they kind of feel
oh,
like, I was
go.
going to say, they kind of feel like it's just sort of hopeless, like they can't get out. And so that's why they don't. Is
Well,
that
I
it?
think it's more complicated than that. It
Yeah.
really is addictive.
Okay.
If you look at trauma bonding in just a purely scientific brain chemical way, the use of intermittent reinforcement of positive behaviors dispersed through the abuse cycle ensures that the victim releases oxytocin, which is a powerful hormone
Mm-hmm.
that plays an important role in pair bonding. It underlies trust and it, combats depression. It's that hormone that we even release when we're holding our baby.
Okay.
So when you get that blast of that, because he's nice, right after he's been mean, this contributes to trauma bonding. So it's over time it becomes like the only thing that can make her feel better is that blast of oxytocin, and ironically, the only person who can give that to her over time is the very person who's abusing her.
Mm-hmm.
It is frustrating for people standing outside of these relationships to understand that. Why does she keep going back? Why does she keep going back? That is the core of the trauma bond, and that is really the core of what I treat in my office.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It kind of reminds me, there was a time when I taught sexual assault and healthy and unhealthy relationships for teens in schools, in
Mm-hmm.
middle schools and in high schools. And it really kind of sounds like the cycle of violence a little bit.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. So it kind of mirrors the
Well,
cycle of violence. Yeah. Go ahead.
well, it does. And honestly, narcissistic abuse is a subset of all, it is domestic violence.
Yeah.
It is somewhat different in the fact that there are often no observable injuries.
Mm-hmm.
It is much more psychologically based.
Yeah.
The tactics are more covert, and many of the tactics make the victims feel like they're actually being tortured. And because it's covert, it's harder for other people to see it because there's no bruises.
Mm-hmm.
So that is kind of what makes narcissistic abuse. I don't want to say more difficult because all abuse is difficult, but it's very isolating for the victim because it's not often seen.
Right. Right. It's very tricky. Yeah. To be able to
Right.
identify and really, really see. And because there's no bruises or anything, it's less obvious. And like you said, my gosh, so much in the head mentally,
Yes.
just destroying, a person's emotions. And I would think, do oftentimes they almost feel like they're going crazy when they're with this person. Like,
Well, yes. I mean,
yeah.
one of the most common tactics employed by people with pathological narcissism is to gaslight their partners. It's into believing the abuse isn't real by denying it, minimizing it, or rationalizing it. So, for those folks who don't know, gaslight is just kind of a term that's come into the popular culture through actually a movie in 1944.
Right.
And this movie basically in the movie the man in the movie slowly drove his wife crazy by turning the lights on and off. What gaslighting is it's an ongoing and multi-pronged strategy of psychological torture in which false information is presented with the intent of making a victim doubt her own memory and perception. It might be simply denial by the abuser that previous abuse incidents ever occurred, or that something wasn't said that was. Or it could be even the staging of bizarre events by the abuser with the intention of disorienting the victim. So such covert mind games really systematically target a victim's mental equilibrium. It elicits an atmosphere of fear, hurt, intimidation, domination, instability, unpredictability, and irritation. And it really makes it easier for the narcissist to control his victim. Let me give you an example of this.
Yeah, please.
One of my clients, one of my clients had a long-term relationship with a man with narcissism.
Okay.
And one thing that he would do, there was a photo, a canvas photo of her on the wall. And she would come home from work and notice that her face on the canvas was dented in. And like someone had punched it. And she would ask him about it. She said, "Did something happen to my picture?" And no, what are you talking about? I don't see any dents in this picture at all. And then of course over time the picture would go flat because it's canvas, and then she'd notice it was dented in again. This went on for 2 years until he finally admitted that he was punching it when he got mad at her when she was gone.
My goodness.
So, and that is very symbolically violent. And she would, notice that her picture was essentially being defaced, but he was denying it. So, I mean, just imagine that kind of how uneasy that would make you feel in your own home.
Right. And I mean, ongoing, you know what you see and you know what you're thinking, but then this person is sitting there looking at you saying, no, that's not true. And then all of a sudden it's like you start to sort of doubt, well, am I crazy? Because do I really see a dent in that photo? My gosh. And
I mean, she would describe going up and looking at it and photographing it to see if she was losing her mind.
Right. Because after a while.
And that is gaslighting.
Yes. Yeah. After a while, the person starts to doubt their sanity and whether or not they're crazy, because this person just says with such conviction that no, my goodness.
That's right.
Now tell me something.
And then,
okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because when the narcissist is doing this, like, I don't know, do they know that they're doing this, or is this just so much a part of them that they don't even know? I don't know. Is this calculating? I mean, do they really know that they're playing mind games with somebody and deliberately doing this? Or is it just a part of their being and they just do this without even, because it's just them? I don't know. I'm curious.
Well, that's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
And it's an important question because so much time is spent by the folks who are in a relationship with them trying to figure them out. Because if they can, solve this, then maybe there's hope for us, or, whatever. What I would say to that question is that it depends. It depends on, I would say sometimes that kind of behavior is just as sinister as it sounds, and it is that deliberate. And because everybody's different, not every person with narcissism is the same. But I would say other times folks with some folks might not be as aware of it, but it doesn't matter. The harm is still there. At some point it ceases to matter for the folks in relationship with them, whether or not it was on purpose or not. But generally speaking, something as, diabolical as the picture incident, that would definitely be on purpose.
Yeah.
Now, some of the raging and the lashing out, that can come from emotional dysregulation. Just that might come from a place that's not as,
right. Yeah, because I'm thinking,
on purpose in the moment.
Yeah.
But it's still harmful.
Right. Because I was just sitting thinking, okay, so could it be that this person is raised maybe with a narcissist parent and just kind of falls into this sort of pattern of behavior, I guess. I don't know. But I'm really trying to figure out, like, where would this come from? This person just decides that they are going to be this way, or are they kind of trained in childhood?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, basically, it's interesting because I work with victims of trauma,
Mm-hmm.
but narcissism, we do know that it is also a lot, and narcissistic traits can also often be a byproduct of trauma. It is a defense mechanism
Okay.
from early childhood trauma. It can. They also think that there's also a biological component,
Right.
but science is still trying to figure all of that out.
Yeah.
Um, and this is a relatively new field. Even just 25 years ago, we really weren't understanding personality pathology the way that we are now.
Okay.
So it is an evolving field, and there's lots of brilliant people working on that piece of it.
Okay.
I guess where I stand on it as a clinician is at some point it doesn't matter where that's coming from for the people in their life. Even if the person with narcissism had trauma as a child, if you are getting hurt every day by that person, it doesn't much matter.
Yeah.
They're going to have to, do their own work or not.
Yeah.
Now, generally speaking, in the field, it is thought that most people with really entrenched narcissistic personality disorder are incredibly difficult to treat because their defense mechanism, their psychological defense mechanism is so high, they don't believe that there's anything that they need to change.
Yes. That's what I was
it's
going
everybody
next.
else's fault.
Yeah. That's where I was going next.
So,
It's like, is there any hope for this person? Like, can they even be treated? Or, is it the fact that they're in such denial about their, what they do? They just don't see anything wrong with it. So why would I change? Because there's nothing wrong. Yeah.
Well, I think right now the data is not what the data shows us now is that these disorders up to now have been incredibly hard to budge. That doesn't mean that somebody, with, NPD can't ever be helped. I'm just not willing to say that. And certainly there have been some amazing treatments that have come out for folks with borderline personality.
Okay, Michelle. So if a client comes to you and they are in the thick of things, they are in a relationship with a narcissist and they're experiencing all these things and what we're talking about, how do you start to help them? Because I can imagine they probably come into you very confused and just very, discombobulated and don't really understand what's going on with them, but they know that they just feel bad. So how do you begin to treat them? Yeah.
Well, the first place I go is safety. Like I said, many people don't come to me until they are in the process of leaving, and it's very hard for real treatment to start until that relationship has ended. That doesn't mean that therapy isn't good and can provide support for a person who's getting ready to leave. Of course, it can. Some of my clients come and they are, they've kind of identified what they're dealing with, but they're really not ready to leave. It is hard to do some of the trauma work that's necessary while they're still in that relationship. But basically, psychoeducation is really important. Learning about the disorder, learning about its impact on the people around the person with pathological narcissism. So I often start there. And then once a person is really committed to changing or is leaving, no contact is really important. And what is no contact? It's kind of what it sounds like, but it's really difficult to do because of kind of some of that addiction the trauma bond that we were talking about earlier.
Right, right.
But no contact is an essential piece of therapy in that when you are constantly dealing with some of the mind games that are coming from your soon-to-be ex or your pathological partner, it's really difficult to clear your mind enough to do what you need to do to get into a healthier state of mind. And being around someone who is that pathological or toxic, it just doesn't really work long time. I mean, just that exposure to pathology over a long period of time, it's damaging.
Right.
So going no contact is essential. And people think, often folks think that you can kind of dip in and out of that, and that rarely works.
Oh, yeah.
Going full on, no contact, no email, no looking at their Facebook account, none of that is another step.
Yeah.
Then, go ahead.
I was going to say, so this kind of makes me think about when you're talking about the cycle of violence, as I mentioned earlier, the honeymoon phase, because when and if you are with that person and you're trying to get help, the person does something nice again, or they kind of, change their behavior a little bit. And so then it becomes confusing because then you're like, well, now they're better. So maybe I don't need to, that's why you're saying that it's just so very important that the no contact rule, because in this time, it can become even more confusing to know whether or not you even need to get out. Yeah.
Oh, the phase that we're talking about now, I mentioned earlier too, it's the discard phase. And so when you're getting close to the end of these relationships, it's often the person with narcissism will just abandon their partner in really the most demeaning way possible to convince her that she's worthless. And this could include leaving her for another lover, humiliating her in public, or leaving her without even telling her why, or even sometimes that he's leaving, blatantly ignoring her, being physically aggressive, a whole range of other abusive behaviors to communicate to her that she's no longer important. However, as soon as she steps away, or if she would make the decision before he would do the discard to leave him, that is often, that's just unacceptable to the narcissist. And so what you're describing, it actually has a word. It's called getting hoovered. And that is a nod to the vacuum cleaner brand. But this is when an abuse victim trying to assert her own rights by leaving or limiting contact in the dysfunctional relationship, she will get hoovered. It describes how she gets sucked back in when her former partner temporarily exhibits improved or desirable behavior.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yep. So, for example, a man with pathological narcissism who previously ignored her will suddenly become inexplicably attentive. And then as soon as she,
lets her
gives
guard
him another
down.
chance, he'll just abuse or discard her again.
Go back to basics. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Unlike normal partners, men with pathological narcissism really ensure that their partners never have closure. And if they decide to leave, he might stalk her or immediately publicly flaunt a new relationship to show that he still has control or he's won the breakup.
Wow.
So really, there's no way. I mean, if there's a way, boy, I have not seen it, but to get out of these relationships easily. They're just, it's not a normal breakup.
Oh my God.
Just put it that way. It is definitely not a normal breakup.
So you have clients then that are with the narcissist, like you said earlier, they're with them. And I mean, it possibly takes a good while before they are out of this. And you're continually trying to give them therapy. Is that it? And trying to work with them, helping them to try to see, while they're with them.
I have to be honest. Yeah, that that it's really hard to engage somebody in long-term therapy who is still
there,
living in that pattern. So I might have someone come and see me for, a few visits, but then if she's not ready to leave, because of this kind of cognitive dissonance she has, he's good, he's bad, it's kind of a byproduct of the abuse. There's very confusing feelings about him. If she comes in and talks about, how bad the relationship is, but then she decides to stay and give it another shot, often people will have so much shame about that they won't want to come back and re-engage in therapy. I always try to tell them, you may decide to go back. I just want you to know I'll still, be here to help you if you do that. But sometimes sometimes those folks don't come back for quite a while.
Yeah.
The people then who finally do get out, and finally do go no contact, then the real work starts. Because this type of relationship can often cause complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
And the kind of severe psychological harm that occurs with this kind of prolonged, repeated trauma has caused therapists who've seen it to even give it a name called narcissistic abuse syndrome. And these symptoms are, they overlap with CPTSD, but there's some really difficult things that folks have to work through in order to fully heal.
Well, I'd like to really get into it. I want to just hear a little bit more about this post-traumatic stress disorder with the narcissist or the behavior we were talking about. So, like, what would it be like? Would this person have dreams of this person? How does it kind of come back up where it causes them, this panic and like that kind of thing?
Sure. Well, it is a basket of very difficult symptoms. So some of your classic, post-traumatic stress symptoms like avoidance behavior, loss of interest, feeling detached, a sense of being limited, sleeping or eating difficulties, irritability, being hypervigilant, easily startled, a lot of psychosomatic illnesses, so illnesses, feelings in the body that are related to, related to the trauma, being dissociated, kind of checked out. It's a trauma symptom. One that's very hard to deal with and carries a lot of shame for the victim is she knows that getting away from this person is the best thing for her, but she is still very likely to have obsessions about the relationship and, ironically, intense cravings for the disordered partner and the relationship after she leaves. That's kind of that addictive piece I was telling you about. And that is the trauma bond. And that is the hardest thing to heal from. But it's, part and parcel of narcissistic abuse syndrome.
Yeah. Can you go into the cravings for this person? What is that experience like? I mean, what do you mean by that? Like,
well, it's kind of brought on by, like, it's very difficult for her. Okay, so cognitive dissonance is when we can't reconcile two very different pictures of the same thing. So this person in her life has brought her probably the most fun, passion, kindness on one hand,
right?
And on the other hand, her worst nightmare. So it creates something that it creates horrible cognitive dissonance. So even though she knows that he's really bad for her, her brain is just remembering only the good thing. And I think part of that is that in his absence, her brain doesn't have a place to go for those feel-good chemicals. So, he used to be there, showing up with the I'm sorry flowers, or whatever the case may be. The hug, the reconciliation that made everything feel so good, that created this trauma bond in the first place. But in his absence, she is stuck on the dark. And so your brain is going to naturally, I think, go searching for those feel-good feelings.
Right.
And even though logically, cognitively know that is just crazy to be missing him,
but
you still do.
Yeah, she still does. Yeah.
You still do. And it's really, and there's so much shame that comes from that. Because do friends and relatives understand that? No. And you don't even understand it yourself when you're going through it.
Oh my gosh.
And it doesn't last forever. That's the good news.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And I'm wondering, is it almost like a withdrawals, like from a drug or an alcohol, drugs or alcohol? Is it sort of, I'm wondering if there's some similarities with the cravings, the, wanting to be with this person so intense and so strong that, yeah.
Well, I have had many of my clients refer to it as, I'm not assuming they, had experience with this, but feeling like it's worse than coming off of heroin.
Wow,
or at least that's what they imagine it would be like.
Yeah.
And you've got to think, when as human beings, most of us are connected. We love openly, and when you open yourself to somebody who treats you so badly without even and I'm sorry, or even if there's an I'm sorry, one that doesn't last for very long, it's really a shock to the system. Narcissistic abuse is it's a huge trauma made out of a million little traumas. It's psychological terrorism really at its worst, and really confusing. Why would the same person who claimed to love you and care for you hurt you over and over and over again without any empathy or remorse?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think that just sounds so incredibly, confusing and just debilitating and just, I don't know, just so bad all at the same time. Oh my gosh. I just hate that for anyone. So you are helping them. So they're finally away from the person and they're able to get help. How long does this, I don't know, take for them to kind of really start to see, a different side and feel better?
It takes a while.
Yeah.
But so the type of therapies that I use for this are attachment therapy, EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization, reprocessing, and somatic experiencing. These are all newer cutting edge trauma therapies that clinicians use for all kinds of trauma. But I find a combination of those, along with just a radical acceptance of my clients and where they're at and what their experience is, the combination, and also of someone who, really understands what they've been through. That combination is really helpful. A lot of therapists, who are amazing therapists, they still don't always understand this type of abuse. It is kind of a specialty.
Wow.
We don't, in graduate school, we don't get a lot of time devoted to learning about these personality disorders. Maybe a day or two a chapter in all of our years of training, much less training about the folks who, live with them. We just don't have a lot of that training.
Okay.
So a therapist who really understands what this is and can identify it, it's very helpful to the client.
Right. Okay. Well, so how can, Michelle, listeners get in touch with you, hear more about this? I mean, if somebody is listening right now and they've seen the title of the interview and they really start to kind of feel like, yeah, this is kind of how I feel. Like I feel like I'm a prisoner and just kind of confused and just feel crazy. How can they get in touch with you to start, talking about this, maybe getting some help, or are there some books and different things that you can recommend for people to read? Yeah. So how can they get in touch with you and all that?
Yes, there's been one thing I do want to say very quickly
Sure.
is that we've been talking about narcissism and narcissists, and there's so much out there about this kind of. We all have narcissistic traits.
Right.
I mean, narcissism is on a spectrum, from normal to disordered. The folks that I've been talking about today are people with the actual disorder.
Right.
So first of all, I think it's really important to understand that just because someone isn't very nice or does something that you don't like, that doesn't necessarily make them a narcissist.
Right. Disorder. Yeah.
This is a whole other level that we're talking about. So that's just something that I wanted to put out there.
Thank
because there's been a lot in the popular press over the last couple years about this that I think has been really helpful, and also although I think it can make some people think that everyone is a narcissist, and that's just not the case.
Right. Okay. Good.
So as far as books, I mean, you can go and one of my favorites is, it's kind of the book that I think launched the field in many ways. It's by Sandra Brown. It's called Women Who Love Psychopaths. I don't really love the title, but I love the contents of the book.
Okay.
Because it really lays out, all of the basic issues. It's a really good primer. And there's lots of materials through her website that I think are very helpful. Dr. Rhonda Friedman, who does a lot of work around just kind of what's happening. She's a neuropsychologist, a lot of work around what's happening in the brain. For folks who've endured this kind of abuse, she's got some really good writings that I think are great too. And Kim Said is a narcissistic abuse writer who has written, I think, the best book on how to go no contact that I've ever read.
Oh, good.
She gives all sorts of great, amazing tips.
To stay away.
She's become my personal friend over the years. We met doing this work, and her book on no contact is I've never read anything better.
Wow.
So I would start with that. And if you were local, I see clients here in St. Louis, and I also do distance work through telehealth. So my website is www.drmichelleroberts.com.
Okay.
And I'm easy to reach through there.
Okay. Well, this has been very, very interesting. I tell you, I've learned a lot, and I hope that my listeners have, because, boy, I didn't realize this is really, really deep. It's a really deep thing. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about it. And, yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, everybody, I hope that you've enjoyed listening to this episode of the Lovers Lounge podcast, where we interview experts and other guests on topics related to love, relationships, and sex. I am your host, Tina Love, and until next time, peace. And of course, love.